daily co-host of Autoline After Hours and host of the Emmy Award-winning program Autoline This Week. I've been honored to be a guest on John's show a few times. I appreciate him and the top-notch crew at Blue Sky Productions. And now you're going to get to see how they make the sausage. So the questions for this session are going to be a little bit different. If you send your emails to viewermail@autoline.tv rather than through the app, and we'll get your questions into this panel. Go, John.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, now I'm just going to say exactly what Kristen just said, because as of right now, we are live streaming this conference on YouTube. So everybody out there in YouTube land, I'm John McElroy, and here's what's going on. We're at the Management Briefing Seminars, one of the most important conferences in the automotive industry globally, organized by the Center for Automotive Research. We're going to be doing a recap of what we've learned here at this conference over the last 2.5 days, and we're going to invite, after we do that recap, your questions. Now, the recap, we're actually going to be recording, and we're going to turn this into one of my television programs, which will go up on our website August 29th. And we welcome questions from you in YouTube land, and you can submit questions in the chat room there. You can send us an email, send it to viewermail@autoline.tv. And for you here who are live, we have set a microphone right up here to the right of the stage, and we welcome you to come up to the mic to ask your questions rather than submit them by email, because we're going to have a camera on that microphone. So here's your chance to let the world know what you'd like to ask. So bear with us a little minute. You're going to learn what this is all about, as Kristen said, making the sausage. But for right now, let me bring up the panel. Come on up. We have Carla Bailo, the CEO for the Center for Automotive Research, John Murphy from Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, and Jada Smith from Aptiv. And I'm going to be explaining this all over. Go ahead, have a seat. I'm going to be explaining this all over again in just a minute, because when this goes up as a television program, they're not going to hear everything that you just heard. So I'm going to say it all yet again. And that's how we do this in television. It's all about getting things to look perfect for the audience. And in a minute here, Jack, our intern, is going to give me the high sign as to when we're ready to go with that. He says, delay it, drag this out a little bit longer. But I really got to commend Carr for trying something new and different and live streaming this and allowing us to record this conversation for our television program. And it looks like he's getting ready very close here. So hello and welcome to Autoline This Week. We've got a great program for you. We're situated at the Management Briefing Seminars in Traverse City, Michigan. We're in front of a live audience right now. And the reason that we're holding this show here is this conference is one of the most important in the world, really, in the automotive industry. We've been here for 2.5 days. We've heard from all kinds of speakers from all over the industry, in fact, from even different places in the world. We've got to recap what was going on here because we learned so much. And let me introduce to you who's on our panel. We've got Jada Smith. She's from really a brand new supplier company called Aptiv. That was carved out of a very traditional supplier. So we're going to get a viewpoint that's a little bit maybe not from the past, but definitely into the future. We've also got John Murphy from Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, one of the top analysts on Wall Street who covers the automotive industry. And we've got Carla Bailo. She is the CEO of the Center for Automotive Research in Ann Arbor, which puts on these management briefing seminars. So I got to say to all three of you, thank you for being on this panel. But let's learn. I mean, Carla, we've heard from all different kinds of people over 2.5 days here. What's one of your key takeaways from the conference?
I think I heard a resounding theme. It started Monday with really the keynote from Rich Sheridan talking about disrupting yourself, making the workplace attractive, making the joy of working, and really bringing out an engaged workforce to bring out the best in people and what they can deliver.
And Rich Sheridan from where? What's he do?
From Menlo Innovations. He's the CEO, came out of the corporate world and started his own small software company. They work out of a basement in Ann Arbor, actually. He has not moved it, even though clearly he has funding to do so. But it's a very open environment, makes the teams work in pairs, changes up the pairs every 5 days, has now his 8th baby in the workplace, and dogs and whatever. And it works. Amazingly, it works. So I encourage everybody, read his books. He has 2 books, Joy Inc. and Chief Joy Officer. And go see the place, because you will be transformed. And even if you think you're a progressive leader, you can learn a lot. We heard similar themes then throughout some of the other speakers during the week. Susan Brennan was talking about, again, moving from the traditional automotive industry into the Silicon Valley, and how there's a difference in thinking there and how to reinvent yourself. And I think in this, really escalating era of technological growth, if you're not continually reinventing yourself, you're going to get behind.
So you're really talking about workplace transformation, taking an existing workplace and transforming it, and maybe not even spending a whole lot of money to do so.
Exactly. It's a lot of behavior change, changing the way you think, changing the way you operate, stopping committeeism and meetings continuously through the day, letting leaders be visionary leaders to move the companies in the directions they need to move today, and trust your staff to manage the day-to-day stuff.
Real good. John Murphy, you bring a Wall Street set of eyes to this conference. What really stuck out for you? What was maybe the most meaningful thing that you learned here?
Well, I think one of the resounding things for the industry is this cyclical versus secular tug of war, right? I mean, I think as we touched on the panel this morning, there's some real cyclical risks, but there's great secular opportunities. And identifying those secular opportunities in a core to future transition sort of way is really difficult for the industry, but there's huge opportunities as the industry transforms.
So what do you mean by secular opportunity? Translate that for me.
I think the industry, first of all, does a great job of delivering travel utility to consumers around the world in a way that's not appreciated generally by the investment community and some of the folks that actually use that transportation. So I think that's really important to recognize, but understanding how to make that better over time. And we simply kind of think it's lowering the cost per mile, increasing the demand, right, the demand function, getting it available to more and more people, and increasing the speed of travel. Those kinds of changes will increase utility to the consumer and more consumers over time, and open up the opportunity set for investment. Now that's through autonomous drive is probably the keystone, right, to get AMOD working. But there's a lot of things from level 1 to level 3 along the way that really can help change and transform things. And that's why you have some great suppliers that are here on stage with us, have been on stage, that really will help the industry get there. But that opportunity is huge. The risk, though, is that some of that investment could be failed and not really come to fruition. And if you're going through this secular downturn and making those investments that don't come to fruition, it can be a tough time to manage through that.
Yeah, we'll get into more of that too, but let's hear from Jada Smith. What stood out in the conference to you?
Well, from a technical perspective, it's interesting that there's areas that everyone tends to kind of agree on. We need to collaborate, not just within the industry, but across industry. Standards are important, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure. But then there's areas where maybe there's still some debate happening. Is automotive grade that important?
And explain automotive grade.
So in the automotive industry, we test more rigorously than they do in, let's say, consumer space.
And you're talking in terms of software.
And not just in terms of software, it's the entire system. So it's software, it's hardware, it's how they're built, it's how they're integrated together. It's temperature range, for example. It's making sure that we can operate at very low temperatures, very high temperatures. It's making sure that there's water intrusion tests, making sure that if you're in a salty environment, like right by the coast, that the car is still going to function. Those are very different than what happens in the consumer space. If your phone gets hot, it says, I'm hot. It's not going to work till it cools down, right? The car can't do that. So the testing and the validation requirements that we put the entire system through is different. It's more rigorous, it's harder, and it's hard to do. It's a challenge, right? And so then the question comes up, how much of that is necessary? as we think about the future. And if we do that, will that stifle innovation? And those are the questions that keep coming up, and it seems like that there's still some debate from various parties about what makes sense. So there's some things that everyone agrees on. There's some things that are still being debated, and it's interesting. And bringing everyone together in this type of environment allows those discussions to take place.
You know, you're right in that, because the consumer electronic industry moves so much faster than the auto industry. But we've all had our telephones crash. We've all had our laptops crash. We can't afford that in a car. So how do you help the industry move much more quickly, try to keep pace with the electronic industry, and yet have this automotive grade? Do you see different parts of the car taking different approaches? Maybe the infotainment cannot be automotive grade, but anything that runs the basic parts of operating a car has got to be automotive grade. Or what do you see?
Well, automotive grade is important. It's just like, let's look at aerospace, look at an airplane. Lives are at stake when you get on an airplane, right? And you can't necessarily say, well, it's okay if this part of the airplane isn't as safe as the rest part, or not as validated to the same level. That said, when it comes to other types of regulations, like around functional safety, for example, there are various degrees, and that's where companies like Aptiv and others can come in and say, okay, based on our systems integration expertise, this product needs to be at this level, whereas this product can be at a different level of functional safety, for example. From a testing perspective, your phone can have a bad day, your car cannot, because lives are at stake. So now, what does a bad day look like? That's where things are a little bit different when it comes to an infotainment system versus an active safety system. But that's where we collaborate very carefully and closely with our customers to make sure that we've got all of that locked down and defined, and that we test and deliver systems that meet those requirements.
Carla, one of the biggest topics at the conference, an ongoing topic over multiple days here, electrification and where that is all going. What were some of the things that maybe you got out of that conversation? And one that came up in the discussions is we see a lot of battery electric models about to hit the market in 2 to 3 years' time, and yet we don't see the consumer demand yet for them. How do you think that might get resolved?
We're going to have to watch other markets besides the U.S., quite frankly. We're going to have to see what kinds of incentives are put in place in Europe and China to continue to drive the market. Interestingly enough, even with the big incentives that we see in China, we're still not seeing the consumers purchasing those vehicles. So there is a big dichotomy.
Or not in enough numbers, you mean? Because EV sales are growing, but not fast enough,
but not
right?
fast enough to meet, what everyone's putting in their pipeline. So it's going to be, really trying to balance that consumer demand with the dollars that you're putting into the investments, and how you're going to make the plants be able to be more flexible, to be able to put the different propulsion systems into the different products so that you can meet that global demand. It's going to depend what kinds of, incentives come in for licensing, incentives that come in for purchasing, also to help with charging in the house. Is the charging infrastructure really going to grow fast enough so that people feel confident that they'll be able to charge in multiple locations? Are we going to have propulsion stations in the future where you can get gas, you can get electric, you can get hydrogen? How are we going to develop the entire system that really needs to propel electrification as we want it to, as a society and as an industry?
John, you already touched on this. Of companies, both automakers and suppliers, having to make big bets on this technology. Let's stick with electrification for the moment. The payoff isn't there. Nobody's making a profit on these vehicles.
Sure. I think if you look simplistically on the cost side, we do this in our Who Makes the Car analysis, a $22,000 component cost before final assembly for an ICE vehicle right now in the U.S. And then if you layer in or transition to a full electric, you're talking about almost $35,000. So there's a $13,000 gap there in cost, right, for a comparably equipped vehicle. That's got to be changed over time. And sort of our forecast is that maybe happens around 2030 in the U.S. market. I think the other thing to be very careful of is the dichotomy in the regulatory environment between the U.S. and Europe on diesel versus gas has proved that the regulatory environment can screw things up pretty badly. And I think the industry and everybody needs to kind of realize that there was the issues at VW for Dieselgate, but that was driven by a regulatory regime that tried to force diesel. And that's the last, real shift in the regulatory environment or push we've seen for powertrain technology, and it was massively failed in Europe. I mean, there's a massive failure there. So I think that this significant regulatory push towards EVs as the solution makes sense. The industry has got to participate in the greening and cleaning up of the environment, but we got to be really careful that these regulatory regimes don't create more problems than they solve. And the last evidence is it really screwed up.
It looks like 2030, everybody's talking, yeah, things will be great by 2030. How do we get from here to there, especially from a profitability standpoint, or do we not?
I think this industry has done a wonderful job of driving down costs and delivering and spoiling consumers in a way that most industries don't. So I do think I have a lot of faith that the industry will drive costs down, and sometime around 2030, we'll see some level of profitability on EVs. But we're talking about a 100-year change here. We're not talking about a generational shift. We're talking about a multi-generational shift in powertrain, because when we look at current powertrains, they've essentially been around more or less in a similar form for the last 100 years. We're talking about a total change. So it's going to take a long time for this to be really profitable and generate the kind of returns the industry needs.
And Jada, I got to believe Aptiv is headlong into this rush to electrification.
The electrification is important. We always talk about that we're focused on 3 megatrends. The first is safe, the second is green, the third's connected. And we have, especially from an architecture perspective, a broad portfolio of architecture solutions that support both traditional ICE vehicles, low voltage, as well as high voltage, so that we're prepared in the event that we see this massive uptick in full BEVs or even the hybrids in between. But as they said, it's a shift. It's going to take time. It's an evolution, and it doesn't mean that as we continue to grow towards full EVs, we're not going to have vehicles with an engine, whether that's a diesel engine or a gas-powered engine. And so it's important that we have a range of solutions to support all of those.
As you approach automakers to sell your technology, how willing is Aptiv to maybe sell at a loss with the hope that this propels the industry forward, that you can make a profit in the future? Because I've heard at this conference some very low prices quoted for batteries, what OEMs are paying, but that's not the true cost of them. It's suppliers who are betting on the future. Is Aptiv ready to make that kind of a bet?
Well, the good news is that my focus is the technology and the engineering, and there's other people that talk about the financials and make those kind of decisions.
Okay. I won't press you on that.
From an analyst standpoint, Aptiv does not do anything that doesn't make economic sense or make a profit. So I think in Jada's defense, I think Aptiv is very focused on profitability and returns.
But I do think we're going to start to see a lot more collaborations. You've got Ford and VW now collaborating on electrification. That's one way to help with the cost burden that we're seeing. I think we'll see more and more of those partnerships forming, not only in the electrification side, but also in the autonomy side.
One of the big discussions here, John, tariffs and the whole trade imbroglio that we're going through right now. What did you pick up on, if anything, or what are some of your thoughts along these lines?
Well, I mean, after covering the industry for 20 years, you think you've seen it all until 2016 hit, and now we've got to worry about trade. I think in the trade panel yesterday, Ann Wilson made some very interesting points about the potential disruption in the industry, but I think Michael Dunn made some very interesting points about how the Chinese may have not treated the U.S. markets and the U.S. economy that fairly, and the way that they've dealt with things as far as IP transfer and openness of the market, as well as other markets around the world, not just even China. So I do think you're kind of in this tug of war once again of what is fair to the U.S. from a free trade from a free trade perspective, which really hasn't been fair for a really long time. So a lot of these issues that have been allowed to fester for a long time are manifesting in some of these very tough actions that are being taken. No doubt the tariffs would be disruptive and potentially damaging for a period of time. But somebody, in the future may argue that 10 to 20 years down the line, there might be more manufacturing jobs in the U.S. and we might be better off for it. It's a real tough thing to figure out right now. But in the interim, it's incredibly disruptive because suppliers, automakers, everybody in the value chain doesn't know where to put capital, right? Because they're uncertain as to where their costs are going to be. So we have massive uncertainty. We have a lot of companies pulling back on CapEx and capital investment, which means jobs are lower, and it's very disruptive in the near term. So I think, getting this worked out sooner rather than later, and hopefully making, trade a lot fairer is really the end goal without that much disruption.
Yeah, I was looking it up this morning, just what other countries charge in terms of import tariffs of automobiles. I looked at Brazil, Turkey, Indonesia, Russia, Europe. They're all way, way higher than what the U.S. charges. So, Carla, what do you think? Fair trade, free trade? Which way is it going to go?
I don't think anybody knows right now. I think one of the most shocking takeaways I had from yesterday was the statement that this could go on for 20 to 30 years. I mean, this is our new kind of, it was the space war and industrial war, and now we have the trade war. I do believe that there has to be a common ground. Right now, everybody is really holding up barriers, especially between China and U.S. Other countries are starting to be, quite reasonable in terms of negotiations. When we look at what's happening with Japan, South Korea, everyone wants to get this settled. Industry and business needs this to be settled as soon as possible because you cannot work in limbo land. You need to have things figured out. Right now, yes, many of the tariffs that have been put in place are harming, some of the businesses here. It's very clear. We can see it in the dollars that are being lost at every investment round. But in the long run, probably it will make more sense. But we don't know right now, and this is why we're constantly analyzing what's happening. More jobs, more production opportunities seems it's the way we want to go. We want to become the manufacturing powerhouse we once were. If tariffs are the right way to do that remains to be seen.
So, John, what do you think? Fair trade, free trade, which way is the needle going to move?
Well, I mean, hopefully for all of us, it's fair free trade, right? And that's what probably makes the sense for most sense for everybody. But getting there is Carla was mentioning, is a very difficult transition. And unfortunately, at the same time as the industry is going through a cyclical downturn, technological secular disruption, we're getting this incremental layer of uncertainty thrown into the equation. And I think just as Carla just mentioned, is that, that level of uncertainty on another major factor for the industry makes it very challenging to manage through. But ultimately, hopefully we get, fair free trade.
I like that term. I'm going to use that.
Well, I just used two of your words, so I just put them together.
Listen, we've been talking about a secular downturn. We've been talking about electrification and the disruption. We've been talking about trade. Let's talk about some of the bright spots that might be there for the future. Jada, what opportunities do you see going forward in the industry right now?
Well, it's all about those megatrends I mentioned, safe, green, and connected. We talked green. Safe, people tend to automatically go towards a full level 4, level 5 vehicle. We're obviously making great strides in that space with our service that we have going on in Las Vegas. We've given a little more than 60,000 rides. We have a 4.95 user rating, and it is, to our knowledge, the largest commercial ride-hailing service leveraging AV. So great strides there. But it's not a one-size-fits-all problem that we're trying to solve, which means we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. So it's also very important that we develop those levels 0 through 3 systems that John talked about earlier. And we do that. We have a scalable architecture that allows us to, and allows our OEMs to scale up and down to deliver advanced safety features for consumers today. That's changing people's lives today, but at the same time planning for what the future looks like. On the connected front, everyone talks about data. Data is important, but the insights that we gain from that data is where the real value is. And so unlocking the power of that data, gathering those insights, and using them in new ways is incredibly important.
Can you give us just a for instance?
Well, one of the things we highlighted at CES this year, we had our fleet of AVs running around, providing on the Lyft network, providing rides to consumers. So we're able to use some of that data we called it the casino report. And we basically were able to go in and say, okay, if a consumer is going to a particular casino at specific times, or they're leaving a casino at specific times, what does that look like? Could that provide some insights to that casino so they know, hey, we need to add a new restaurant venue. We're losing people at the dinner hour, or we're losing people at the show hours because another venue has a different show. how can we keep them in a particular ecosystem? So they're going from one property to the same owner's property, right? So that was incredibly insightful, and it was taking data that we have, but how can we use it in a way to provide insights to a business that perhaps hadn't thought about it that way?
Carla, same question. What opportunities are there out there for the future in the automotive industry?
I'm seeing some amazing things happening, especially when we look at our aging society and some of the current demonstrations and trials that are starting to enable people to get to their medical appointments, to enable people within senior living communities to have options besides driving themselves around, trialing in contained areas, and that only makes us smarter then to begin to deploy in other areas. But we're starting with those populations that need the help the most. Persons with disabilities, be they cognitive or physical disabilities. And we're actually seeing some good results there. So I like the way the industry is going in that regard, learning but helping society at the same time. This is wonderful. And then the old, let's call it the old stuff. Let's not forget the old stuff. Internal combustion engines keep getting better year over year. Vehicles keep getting lighter. We saw some amazing lightweighting awards that were given out here, and people are continuing to do that research. Smart factories. Going out and listening to the workers, having old workers work with young workers and get better ideas and be able to make things more efficient on the factory floor and make it a better environment. So, not only are we doing the shiny, bright, and new stuff, which is cool and great to talk about, but all the old stuff is also being improved at a very fast pace. And this is what I like about the industry right now. Wherever you are, there's cool, advanced stuff happening.
And John, I got to believe, being on Wall Street, you're looking at all kinds of new opportunities, maybe even new companies coming on.
Well, I mean, I think the industry, maybe it's a function of, the humble, polite, Midwesterner, that dominates this industry in the U.S., but is not sort of as forthright as what it delivers to society, and it delivers mobility. And to Carla's point just about, the old folks being able to get to their doctor's appointment, it's everybody being able to get everywhere. I mean, if it weren't for the auto industry, you'll all be driving around in horse and buggies and traveling at like 10% of the speed that we do right now. So I think that, the industry, has all of these opportunities in front of it. Maybe I need to look back at history to understand, that, there was a shift from horse and buggy to cars in the 1930s. And Model T, I think Tobin had a great slide on that before, where the speed of travel went up by a factor of 5 to, 8 times. The industry has this opportunity to potentially really increase the speed of travel safely, more effectively for more folks at a lower cost. And then society as a whole benefits quite dramatically. So the function of this industry of getting people from A to B quickly, safely, and cheaply can be improved on and can create a lot of value for investors. And that's in a myriad of ways. Aptiv does it. Many other suppliers are doing that. And it's a huge opportunities for the industry. But they've got to get out of this sort of humble, polite position and get a little bit more aggressive and say, hey, we're providing you a whole lot of value. We can provide a whole lot more over time and get to it.
Because if they don't, there's tech companies that are more than willing to step into this space, right?
I think the auto industry can hold their own, and we'll keep moving forward.
All right. Thank you for saying that, brother. Look, we're going to have to wrap it up. I know we only skimmed over some of the highlights. There was so much more detail that went on at this conference. But I think this helps, recap what we've learned, brings it to an audience, a television audience, a live YouTube audience as well. So I want to thank all three of you. Carla Bailo from the Center for Automotive Research, John Murphy from Merrill Lynch Bank of America, Jada Smith from Aptiv. Thank you very much for sharing some of your insights of what we've learned over the last 2.5 days here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the TV part of it. And like I said, that'll go up on our website August 29th. It will also be shown on public television, but they're going into pledge break right after that. So it'll be a little bit after when it actually goes on over-the-air television. But right now, we'd like to open up things to you, the audience here, and you out in YouTube. And let's see here. We've already got a few questions. Now remember, if you want to be here in the audience, we've got a microphone right up here to the right-hand side of the stage. Don't be shy. We won't bite your head off. But come on up, but I'm going to get the everything going here. But meanwhile, from YouTube, Dave H. wrote in to say, has anyone addressed the issue of a basic autonomous family car being used to tow a trailer? I don't think anybody talked about that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's been covered, right?
Nobody talked about it, but do you want to try that one?
Well, I guess I'd be interested. Are we talking like an L4 vehicle, an L5 vehicle? But at the end of the day, an autonomous vehicle is capable of doing things that a traditional vehicle does. Now, towing a trailer, okay, a traditional vehicle today tows a trailer. Are we working on that? Not yet. Doesn't mean it's not on the horizon, but we're kind of starting with making the car drive itself and do that in greater and greater geofenced areas, doing that safely. I mean, that's the overarching concern, is that we're doing that safely. And then it continues to grow from there.
In a way, it is being worked on. Heavy truck is doing it.
Yeah.
Already, we're making heavy trucks.
Commercial
That's
vehicle.
a big trailer.
Yeah.
So it's being worked on. I think we'll probably see that sooner than people expect, just because we don't have enough truck drivers today. E-commerce is booming. We'll work out those issues, and that will then help with bringing it down into the full-size pickup market, et cetera. But that may take a little bit more time for people even to get used to doing that.
Right. And you've got to imagine if the industry figures out level 4 and 5, the trailer will be right behind it, unintended. Right.
Now, I thought it was kind of a silly question, but it actually turned out to be a really good one.
Well, I mean, one of the things
There's no silly question.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot more about, we've talked a lot about our smart vehicle architecture, and that enabling all of this advanced technology, it starts with the foundation, and that's the architecture. And we need to create a scalable platform that can go up and down as necessary. And a lot of that, you hear a lot of talk about skateboards, that you develop a skateboard type approach that you can put different top hats on to support different needs, whether that's a family vehicle, whether that's a delivery truck, a van, whatever it is. And so this type of trailer concept, it kind of fits into that scalable platform approach.
Okay, we got another question from YouTube, not yet from the audience here, where the microphone is to the right of the stage. But anyway, I hope I say this name right. Sudhi Upaluri, Technical Director from Computational Sciences Experts Group, has a really good question here, I think. And John, I'm going to ask you to start off with it. Sure. He says, all the forecasts showed that shared mobility numbers, they just don't work. What assumptions are the shared mobility companies making to make sure these numbers work as a business?
Well, I mean, I think simplistically, over time, you got to get the dollar cost per mile down to the consumer, and that's really the key. I mean, I think if you look right now, the average consumer is spending 50 cents or less, per mile. A new vehicle buyer would cost closer to $1. But you look at the Uber and Lyft costs right now of anywhere from $3 to $6. You're talking something that is many multiples of the average cost, of ownership or driving for a mile for a consumer. So I think they have to understand and figure out how to drive that cost down to be comparable to what people are paying right now. Now, the second, third, and fourth vehicles in a lot of households may be at some level of risk for this because their costs are high and the incremental mile might be occasional. So there might be some opportunity there for these shared mobility companies to create a business to start. But over time, they're going to rely on the traditional industry to deliver the platform and the vehicle, as Jada was mentioning, that they will work off of. So, I mean, they're going to have to work with the traditional industry unless they can somehow usurp them on manufacturing and technology, which, as Jada mentioned, these guys getting automotive grade is not going to happen anytime soon without the help of the industry.
Jada, you mentioned Aptiv is already involved in autonomous ride sharing in Las Vegas. So what do you think it's going to take to make the numbers work to where providing these kinds of services churn a profit?
Well, and profitability, again, I'll leave that for the financial guys. But on the technology side, our focus is on developing a technology platform that we can then provide to our customers, whomever they may be, that are going to enable this type of service. And that's really what we've done with our service in Las Vegas. And for us, it's a learning experience. It's not just learning about the technology, but it's also learning about consumers. What do consumers need? There's a lot of fear, right? But 9 out of 10 of our riders say they would ride again. We have a 4.95 user rating on the Lyft network, and there are many human drivers that don't have that rating. And that 4.95 tells us three fundamental things. First, it says that people felt comfortable riding in an autonomous vehicle. Second, that they felt like they got from point A to point B efficiently. And third, that they felt safe doing so. So when we think about just being able to make this system available more broadly, that's incredible information that we can use to continue to improve.
How does that work? You hail the car with an app?
It's the Lyft app. So you land in Las Vegas, you open up your Lyft app, you have an opportunity to opt in, and then you go to hail a car, and an autonomous Aptiv vehicle could come up and pick you up.
And it's what, the same price as
Yep, it's the same price.
You don't have to tip the driver.
We still do have a safety operator behind the wheel. There are some rules in place. It's not just about the technology, it's about the ecosystem. So we integrate responsibly into the ecosystem, and that includes working with the local governments, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, as well as business owners. So when we are on private property, we will have our safety operator take over the vehicle and drive it like a traditional vehicle. But when we are on public roads, the car is driving itself.
Very good.
I think, just let me add in there, I think you really have to look to the logistics and supply chain industry more than we are today. So what are some of the best practices? You make the right size container that fits the part. So what is the right size product that needs to be used in a shared mobility service depending on the need of the customer? And then what's the other best practice? You never have a hauling device empty. So you've reduced those vehicle miles traveled with nobody inside by using data and data analytics to really begin to put together that perfect route and then be able to have the right product, right size, right propulse, right time. And we have to bring those logistics people into this conversation.
Real good. We've got somebody at the microphone. Would you say your name and company and then ask your question?
Yeah, I'm very lucky to stand here. So my name is Qian Ran. We are from a research group working on lithium batteries for electric vehicles from Illinois Institute of Technology. So we learn a lot these days. We know the future trend, and everyone can see that the trend of going electrification and the growing market of EVs in the future. However, we're still facing the challenge that about the timeline of the new technology adoption. For example, we are working for the next generation silicon-based lithium batteries. However, it also said the solid-state battery will be ready by 2030. So we know that it's a very heavy investment. It's a long-term investment building the whole manufacturing line. So we want to know how the car makers, how the OEMs make the decision on when and what technologies their timeline of adopting the technology, because it's really help us decide how we tailor our technology. We are really afraid that like they decided to directly invest for 30 or 40 years later, prepare for so we really want to know the timeline and how the decisions are made.
Well, good.
Did I make my...
Yeah, yes. No, you made yourself clear. Thank you for that question very much. Who wants to tackle that? How do you make that kind of a decision? Investment decision?
It's being studied every day. I mean, there are groups in the automotive companies that are doing these kinds of studies on a daily basis. And, typically the product timeline for a full model change today is between 5 and 8 years, depending on the model itself. And by the time you launch a product, you're already planning the next one. And typically, you're looking 10 to 15 years out in terms of product portfolio. And there are more advanced planning groups that are looking even beyond that in advanced engineering and advanced manufacturing. So you have to keep up with the technology trends. You have to make some estimations, and then you make the best product decisions you can, also involving the economics involved. And right now, with the issues with batteries and looking at alternative materials and looking at solid state materials, this is going to go on. But because it's unknown at this point when we'll actually have that real product to put in a vehicle, you make your plans based on the products that exist today. I hope that helped.
And Jada, maybe you can talk a little bit. I mean, I'm sure you've had to go through that kind of a process.
More broadly, it's about building relationships. As Carla pointed out, there's a lot of conversations happening both inside the industry with research groups like yourself, with the OEMs, with the supply base, other technology providers. And so it's about having those relationships, having those conversations so that you can identify where should you be investing, where do people think the trends are going, what is the kind of rough estimate relative to timeline, and when should we start investing and how much. And so there's not like a one answer, but that's the process that's typically followed.
And I would just add, when you look at product cycles on powertrain, I mean, you're looking far longer than just the 5 to 8 years. You're probably looking at 2 to 3. So I mean, you could be in a zip code of 10 to 20 years on powertrain investment decisions. And I think you always come back to can you deliver the consumer a vehicle, right, whether it be ICE or EV, that is the same cost or lower and a better vehicle. And right now the answer on EVs is simply it's a higher cost vehicle with some limitations on it. So, right, it's a really challenging thing. Now, if you working battery technology could give us the answer as to when costs will come down and it'll be parity with ICE, then you have the answer better than we do. And I think that's really one of the challenges. This is a circular reference in trying to understand how these costs will come down. The product, the power density will go up, the charging times will come down, and the consumer will be more accepting of it. And that's really the significant challenge, is that you're kind of stuck in this circular reference of trying to figure this stuff out. We think, all-in costs, for the consumer here in the U.S. around 2030, upfront costs, but operating costs will start to change over. And once the consumer starts to understand that, they'll shift in that direction. But if you can deliver, a battery that's much cheaper tomorrow, it'll happen faster.
Thank you so much. It's very encouraging. We're trying to reduce the cost of the battery to better serve the automotive industry.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got another question that came in via Twitter, and I knew this was going to come up too. Johannes Brorson says, will you talk about Tesla? John, you want to start on that?
Sure. Well, right now, to be clear, we haven't underperformed on the stock, I think, but I do think a lot of the stuff that Elon has done for the industry as far as pushing it forward and trying to advance the ball on electrification, as well as the connected car on over-the-air updates, has been really great. And I think in his mind, in a lot of ways, he's been very successful, despite the fact they're not turning a consistent profit or cash flow at this point. But he has achieved a tremendous amount. You got to give him a lot of credit for being a visionary, a little wacky from time to time in the way he deals with stuff. But sometimes it takes that sort of wacky visionary to actually advance the ball and push things forward. Over the long haul, I do think the traditional players will catch up. You're seeing the German Lux manufacturers push forward very, very quickly. So I do think that their viability is a significant question mark in the long run. But the success, if you measure it on change, has actually been pretty robust so far.
Yeah, I look at Tesla in two different ways now. I look at the product, and I'm blown away from an electrical and electronic standpoint what they've achieved with their product. They're a decade ahead of everybody else, I believe. Then I look at this corporate entity called Tesla, and it's kind of shaky is the way I see it.
And the ability to manufacture, right? Get to automotive grade, Jada's point. Their manufacturing capability is nowhere near superior to what's going on in the auto industry, and you can certainly argue is extremely inferior in a lot of ways, and that's a significant sort of fundamental problem with the company.
One of the things they did, though, and this kind of touches on what John was saying and references back to something Carla mentioned earlier, they were a disruptive force on the traditional automotive industry. And I think it's been a healthy disruptive force, and it's really made everyone understand the status quo isn't good enough. We need to continue to evolve and push ourselves to be better. That visionary leadership that was provided is really helping people see that we can go beyond where we've been, and now there's new doors that are open that we can explore. And I think that's a healthy thing that Tesla has been able to accomplish.
Carla, anything?
I think they've been a very positive driving force of change and advancement and trying new things and coming to the market fast. I think also they've demonstrated that car manufacturing is hard, really hard, and you just can't come as a startup and immediately think you could just start building cars.
Okay, we got a question here from Marcus Hellman. He says, we're rushing into autonomy. There's a lot of money being poured into it. At the same time, it's hard to figure out if there's any real serious consumer demand for this. Does the public really want AVs, or are we just pushing it on them? You actually had some pretty interesting stats about follow-up rides with autonomy. Where do you think it's going? And now you're sort of self-selecting, right? People say, yeah, I want to go in this thing. What do you think?
Well, they opt in.
They opt in, okay. Yeah. But that's not what the polls show of what the general public thinks about AVs. They're very leery.
Well, we think, John mentioned earlier about like back in the early 1900s when we were in this horse and buggy era and cars were being introduced. And people were afraid of cars. It was different. Change is hard and change is scary, and that's normal. And that's what we're seeing here. Change is hard and change is scary. And I've had the privilege of riding in our autonomous cars hundreds of times. I know John's been in the cars. And I know that there's other people in the audience who have had an opportunity, whether it's our car or a different car, to ride an autonomous vehicle. But there's many people who have not. My favorite thing to do is to ride in a self-driving car with someone who it's their very first time. Because at this point, it's like, okay, it drives itself. Yeah, big deal, right? Because I've done it so much. But when there's that first person in their first ride, and they're asking all these questions at the beginning, they're like, oh my God, who turned on the turn signal? Well, the car turned on the turn signal. And they say, well, how did it know? And we tell them, oh, well, how did the car change lanes? Okay, so we go through all that. And then 5 to 10 minutes into the ride, they're on their phone. And they're not looking around, they're like this, And that's when we know we've got them, because they're bored. And a boring ride in an AV is the best ride. And it feels like a normal ride. And at this point, when you think about a ride-hailing platform, which is what we're doing in Lyft, with Lyft in Las Vegas, every car to the passenger is a self-driving car, because you're not driving, right? So whether it has a human driver driving or the car is driving itself, as long as you get to where you got to go efficiently, you get there safely, and you feel comfortable, which our 4.95 rating says, then it's going to work. And people, they ask me, are you scared? Would you put your children, and I have 2 kids, would you put your children in the car? And I said, well, I wouldn't be a good parent if I put their mom in a car, right? That wasn't safe. So the answer is yes, it's safe, it's different, and change is hard. But once people get in it and they experience it, at that point, they do it again, and that's the sign.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're asking the right question. Should we be asking, do you trust a self-driving car, or should we be asking, do you really like driving? I think most people who spend tons of time in traffic jams, which most of us do, that's not fun anymore, and your time can be better spent. We saw the graph that went up the other day. You waste all your PTO in commuting. Fundamentally, anywhere from 9 to 30 days of PTO you waste by sitting in a car commuting. And are we asking the right question? Are we asking the right people? And I always go back to persons with disabilities, physical or cognitive, that have never had the opportunity to drive, but suddenly their world can be totally changed. So we have to ask the right question and ask the right people.
And I think it's early days for people having experience. I mean, the Aptiv Lyft partnership in Las Vegas is a great one, because you're getting some good data there. But people aren't really familiar with the technology, and as they get more familiar and see it, they'll enjoy it. And I think when you look at whether it be L 1 to 3 or potentially L4 and 5, it is the keystone technology that will dramatically increase safety for the industry and allow the industry to deliver a product that can travel at faster speed. And if, Carla's point is, if you can say, okay, the average American is spending more than 5 years of their life in a vehicle, you can say, I can increase the speed of travel by 20%, I can give you a year of your life back. A year of your life, remember, this is a year of your life. Or maybe I can increase it by 40% and I can give you 2 years. Or maybe I can increase it, 2x, and I can give you almost back, 2.5 to 3 years of your life. People will pay a lot of money for that time back from their life, because it's just wasted time. And they don't subscribe to the notion necessarily that, that people will be, gain that time by being in a car that's just autonomously driven, driving at the same speed, because you still have that option right now with a driver or an Uber or Lyft. But if you can increase that speed of travel, people will pay a whole lot more money for it. And it will open up huge swaths of real estate in this country that are now sort of viewed as barren land, and it'll create massive economic activity. And if you want to get GDP back from 2 to 3% growth back to 4 to 5% growth in the U.S., this is the answer.
That's a great point, because you can be so much more productive in your car. You can do so much more in that regard. That's been overlooked. And Jada, I love the point that you're making is that we need butts in seats. I mean, you didn't phrase it that way. That's me. But that's the fastest way to change the public's opinion is let them experience it. Okay, we got another gentleman here at the microphone.
Hi there. Jim Popio from Smithers out of Akron, Ohio. Quick question with electric vehicles. We seem to be pushing for these battery electric vehicles, and my question is for regulation reasons, greenhouse gas reasons, whatever it might be, what will these batteries do to the waste stream? What are the considerations that are being made? Anybody researching it, analyzing it? What's it mean to the industry or to the environment?
Great question.
Yeah,
super important question.
It's very important, the recyclability and reusability. And it's being studied not only by the automotive industry and the battery suppliers, but also by the power companies. Because you have the opportunity, even when a battery is removed, its useful life is gone in a car, it still has about 40% of charging capacity left. And we should be able to use that, and many studies are being done to supplement the grid and help with the grid balance and the issues that we have with our grid. So the power companies, the automotive companies, and battery companies are all working in tandem about this.
So they have a second life, but what's the end of life look like?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to throw them away in landfills, that just seems like designing for end of life seems to be something that we miss oftentimes as engineers.
I know it's being studied. I don't think there's an easy answer today. I'll be very honest, but it's definitely under study.
I can weigh in on that a little bit because I've been researching this for the very reasons that you ask. If in 10 years all we're doing is throwing these batteries in landfills, electric cars are going to get killed from an environmental standpoint. Tesla claims that it can recycle roughly 60% of its battery. Now, they're very vague about what they've published on this. I don't know if that includes the pack, so you're recycling some of the aluminum and all that. You got to get down into the guts of it. And it's being studied. In fact, Michael Berube, I don't know if he's still here, from the Department of Energy, the DOE launched a big study last year into what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. I think he told me we're about 2 months away-ish from the results of those studies being published. Right now in the United States, there is one lithium-ion battery recycling center in Manchester, Ohio, by a company called Retrieve. It used to be called Toxco, which I love that name. And there's a company in Europe called Umicore that seems to be doing much more of it. But here's the challenge. It's not just a technical issue of being able to reduce this down to its core materials. It's will there be a market demand for those materials? Right now we know how to recycle virtually all the plastic in an automobile. Almost none of it is reused again because virgin plastic is cheaper. And all the glass in the automobile, 0 of it is recycled. Absolutely none. Because of tinting, because of defroster, in some cases radio antennas, we don't know what to do with it. Whereas if you look at steel, aluminum, iron, zinc, copper, whatever, there are truckloads of them leaving recycling centers every day because there's a market demand for it. So there's both a technical issue that's yet to be overcome, and I'm dying to hear what the DOE is coming up with. But then we've got to know that there's a market demand for those materials, because otherwise they're going in the landfill. And, there's been a lot of talk in this conference of cradle to grave. That's not the answer. The grave is the landfill. We used to talk about throwing things away. Well, where's away? There is no more away. Away went away. We've got to keep going through. So the new terminology has got to be cradle to cradle. And unless we achieve that, we're not achieving true sustainability.
And I weigh on one other thing. I think the important thing on EVs is there's a great recognition of the source of the energy. And if it's not coming from solar or nuclear and it's coal-fired plants like it will be in China, you are creating a relocation of the problem and maybe even a greater problem. And I think in China, there needs to be sort of a global watch on this, because they're trying to move smog from city centers out to, countryside to clean up the city center, but not to clean up the globe. And that's a very, very, very important thing in China that's not being addressed right now.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Look, we're going to have to wrap this discussion up because the train will run on time. We're going to end this at noon.
Thank you.
But ladies and gentlemen, please, a warm round of applause for my panel here. It's terrific. I got to say, personally, I really love the fact that Carr invited us up to do this. I hope it worked wonderfully well. Jada, John, why don't we all get off stage and
Yep.
Carla, I think it's up to you to wrap up the whole conference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
so
you, Carla.
much. Really appreciate it. So even Carr is disrupting itself by trying something new. I'm going to make this very quick because I know you've had a long 2.5